Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Richards, Technical Services Manager of the Managing General Agents Association. And on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to the fourth in our series of 6 sessions aimed at senior leaders and managers looking at diversity, equity and inclusion, and how you can influence and implement the correct legal procedures and best of class culture within your own organisation. Before I introduce our presenter, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. Please ensure your microphone and camera are turned off. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Time allowing, these will be asked and answered at the end of the event. If we run out of time, questions will be answered post-event. The presentation is accredited for CPD hours if relevant to your ongoing professional development programme. This briefing is being recorded, and the recording and slides will be available in the members area of our website post-event. You will also be sent a feedback survey. Please take the time to complete our survey, which will take no longer than 2 minutes. This allows us to deliver the best possible training to our membership. So I'd like to introduce you once again to Holly Mapstone, Senior Human Resources Business Partner on behalf of our training partner, Searchlight Insurance Training. Holly is an associate of CIPD with extensive board-level HR experience, including at HR Director level, which is FCA certified. Her pragmatic and agile approach, combined with strong operational, strategic and commercial experience, delivers business improvements and cost savings whilst driving up employee engagement. Her passion to create resilient and positive cultures will help engage your teams and influence the business to execute excellence. So do enjoy the training, and everybody. And Holly, over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining today. So as we have done on all the previous ones, we are on the 4th live webinar. So we're going to just run over the learning objectives for today. You've seen on the screen the first slide, we're talking about creating safety in the workplace, so psychological safety. So the learning objectives of today are to summarize what psychological safety is and how this impacts your professional life, your management styles, business growth and cultural goals. You'll be able to lead conversations with peers and senior leaders on what drives cultural change and how to create safety, and being an equitable leader will increase your engagement and success. You'll be able to explain to your peers and leadership why devising a plan to create a psychologically safe environment for all teams should be considered at the board table, and what values that bring, what desired behaviour should we be seeking from our teams. And then finally, we'll be able to list some tools, ideas and resources to support your business to create that psychologically safe environment for your teams to excel in, looking at the best working environments, and in turn this will help enhance your ability to be an equitable leader, as well as performance, growth standards, engagement and focus. Perfect. What a mouthful. Okay, let's just kick off. So I'd like to just get a little bit of engagement before we get into the detail. So if you could use your chat, I would just be really interested to hear from people as to what they think psychological safety is. It's a bit of a buzzword. Many people may have heard it. And I'd just be interested to know if anybody, what's their take on it. There really is sort of no right or wrong, but it's just an interpretation of what psychological safety means to you. So please pop in the chat. I'll open the chat now. Mental health awareness, that's a great one. Yeah. Just wait for a few other comments to come in. So what does that mean? When you hear that, you read that. Yeah, feeling of speaking up, great. Anybody else have anything to add on what they think that means for them or their team? No? Feel free to keep adding. Okay. So a couple of those comments were definitely along the right lines. So the definition of psychological safety is that feeling and belief that you can share your thoughts, opinions and ideas freely without fear or shame. So exactly being able to speak up and have no fear or shame within your workplace. So psychological safety is a group phenomenon that reduces personal feelings of risk or fear. So we've all had that feeling of when we've done something wrong or maybe made a bad decision, or someone on your team's made a bad decision. And it's about thinking about how that can influence their behaviour and their performance, and what sort of environment that we can create for them to be able to actually excel in those situations, rather than unfortunately have that risk and fear take over. So why are we talking about this today? Why are we bothered? So it's scientifically proven that teams that have a larger level of psychological safety have the ability to collaborate, share, trust each other, and show innovation, and in tow then bring up the performance levels and engagement. So it's really important to let's consider the benefits of this. So some of the statistics: 89% of people believe that psychological safety in the workplace is essential for them. So you may be thinking, okay, I've just, read about this, or I've seen this buzzword, just sort of learning about this now. What does this mean? Actually, if you look at this, nearly 90% of people actually, when you look at it and you look at the definition, will actually go, yeah, that really does mean something to me, and it plays a huge part in where I want to work, what team I want to work in, what projects I want to engage in, my length of service and my commitment. So when you delve into it, actually a huge proportion of people actually feel it's very essential for them. And how does this impact you and your team? So 2 in 5 people feel held back to be themselves at work by fear of failure. I kind of maybe anticipated that statistic to be slightly higher, but still 2 in 5. So that's 2 out of 5 people on your team will not be performing to their utmost and to their whole capability because of that fear of failure. And then 3 in 5 people are hiding something about themselves to their employer, which is crazy. We spend most of our times, at work, whether that's in a workplace or at home or over Teams, and we should be feeling completely comfortable to be our full self. So 3 in 5 is still quite shocking. So how does this impact your team and your performance? I'm going to just talk about this example. So Google ran a Project Aristotle, and they looked at 180 teams across their corporation. They looked at low-performing teams, and they also looked at high-performing teams. And they looked at defining what makes them a team, what makes them effective. They collected the data, and then they identified the dynamics between those teams and did a direct comparison between the ones that were high-performing and the ones that were low-performing. And they measured it on a couple of metrics that you'll see on the side: psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning and impact. So they looked at all these sorts of things when looking at the comparison between the 2 teams and how their performances were. And psychological safety was on top. So from all the research that came out from the 180 teams, this was the top priority, and not just from the people within those teams, but also from a performance perspective. So when looking at the high performing teams, that was the top priority for them in terms of allowing them to succeed and continue to excel on their performance. And then overall, people felt as though that psychological safety working environment was a top priority for them to continue to work within those teams. So why is this? So people feel more confident if they're able to speak up. They feel they can take on more risk. If people can take on more risk, then they're not going to shut down their innovation and creativity in certain situations. Potential dangers are highlighted. So when you're in this environment where you can be collaborative and you can suggest ideas and explore, then the potential pitfalls and barriers can be highlighted and identified earlier. And there is a space to disagree and have sort of that positive conflict that we'll talk about later. But that is what's kind of pulled out from that Project Aristotle that Google done, is that these people felt much more confident within their teams to speak up and be okay to take risk and admit when failure has happened. So what are the benefits? We've talked about this. So 27% reduction in employee turnover. So your engagement will increase. If people are feeling safe within their teams and their relationship with their line managers are safe, then they're much less likely to start thinking of their next career move. 76% are more engaged, 50% more productivity, 74% less stress. So I don't know, again, when you're looking at, someone put in the chat mental health awareness, and I don't know whether sickness levels are something that's concerning you as a leader at the moment, but workplace stress and anxiety is something that we're seeing on the rise, And so to be able to reduce that even by half, if not 74% less stress in the environment, I think is definitely a positive for the performance. And then 29% of more life satisfaction. People feel as though it's more rewarding to be at work, and until you kind of get that work-life balance which everyone's striving for. And people are 26% more ready to take on new skills. So they're okay to take on a new task, or they're okay to step outside their comfort zone. One, because they learn faster, but two, they're not afraid to fail in those situations. So when you think of a team that might not have that psychologically safe environment, they're less likely to be open to trying new ideas or stretching outside their comfort zone because of that fear of failure and risk comes involved. 57% are more likely to be collaborative, and 67% are more likely to apply the new learned skill. So again, you're creating an industry where people are developing and growing naturally, and in turn the business is thriving from those new desired behaviours that you're seeing. And why is that so? Again, mistakes can be made. It's about talking about the opportunity to make mistakes and to learn from those. The new ideas can be shared without fear. So people can suggest ideas, and there's no fear that that might be a silly idea, or we've already tried that, so why would we try that again? It's a really collaborative approach. And there's accountability. So everybody has an accountability to make that culture and that environment safe. And when everybody's working together in that way, that's where you get that level of new ideas, people stepping outside their comfort zone, taking on more performance-led tasks, and in turn the business starts to benefit. So the behaviour. So what behaviours would we typically like to see in a safe environment? So when we think about these words, so there is empathy. So people understand the starting point where people are. They understand the journey that they may want to go on. They understand that it's okay to get things wrong. So there's a real level of empathy within the teams. There's no blame culture. Blame culture has been something, again, that's been spoken about in the past, especially when we've kind of gone on a cultural and values journey within the sector, and obviously very big within the FCA in terms of cultural statements. So this no blame culture is very big. And people speaking up without fear. So how often do people share their ideas? How do they share their ideas? Do you facilitate the platform for them to be able to have that that voice within the business? Do you have an employee voice? So these are the sorts of behaviours that we would be seeing when you've got a psychologically safe team. So I'm going to go to a poll now. So it's just a very simple yes or no question. So do you feel you can bring your whole self to work as a leader? The poll should be showing on your screen now. Please just feel free to answer. Honestly, they're anonymous. So excellent. We've got a couple coming in. I will give it a couple more seconds. We've got 4 more people to answer. So it's looking that predominantly yes, as leaders, you do feel as though you can bring your whole self to work. But 2 more that may need to answer if anybody's out there that still wants to answer. I think we can close the poll now. So interestingly, 69% of you feel that you can bring your whole self to work, but then there's 31% that are just on this this webinar today that feel that they can't. So as a leader, if we can't, then how can we expect our teams to do the same? So it's really interesting statistics. We're going to dive a little bit more into what we can do about that. Okay, and then when we think about the culture, because all of this is underpinned by the behaviours and the cultural values that you expect within the business. I'm going to ask you these 2 further questions, not in a poll, but if you could answer in the chat, that would be amazing. So what helps you feel safe? So those that have answered yes, why do you feel that you can bring your whole self to work? What helps you? Is it the team? Is it your line management relationship? Is it flexibility? Is it just your role in general? And those that answered no, can you think of examples maybe where particularly you have felt in a psychologically safe environment to work within, and then what were those feelings of safety? I'll leave that for you for the next minute to pop in the chat. Yep, so no judgment. That's excellent. Yeah, no judgment on anything really, I think is you can't limit that to certain ideas. It's just being completely open-minded. We spoke on the last session about unconscious bias decisions and we're trying to rewire our brains. That's really interesting. Not being humiliated or punished for speaking up. Excellent. Yeah. So being able to have that freedom, I guess, and autonomy to suggest ideas that might be slightly out of your comfort zone. Not feeling judged by your team for when you're speaking up. So really important. Line managers actively encouraging to speak up. So yeah, again, we spoke about how can we facilitate that? What platforms do you use to allow people to feel the same way that you want to feel as a leader? Flexible managers who encourage creativity and ideas. Yeah. When we look back at that project Outstall, and it's coming up on the top of the list, the couple of key questions that they asked those teams was around innovation and creativity. So it's quite telling that even when you're in maybe a transactional role and it's quite operational, people still want to be able to feel as though they've got a level of innovation and creativity to change the way they work, whether that's process-led, operationally systems-led, or just adding to bigger projects in a more creative way. So it's something we really need to think about. Being more aware of how people like to communicate. Yeah, really interesting. We've done a session on challenging conversations, and with the next session is on inclusivity and inclusivity communication. So yeah, that's a really good one. Thank you. Keep popping your ideas in if you're still thinking. And then the final question is, do you have any examples of feeling safe? I think probably we've covered a couple of those, but if anybody wants to add any specific examples that we could share, might just help people reframe their minds in terms of how other people feel. Again, showing that level of empathy. So what you may feel is safe may be different to others. So please feel free in the chat in the background to add those examples of what the feeling of safety brings to you. Okay, so what drives this culture? I think we've probably covered off them in the examples, but positive relationships. So managing upwards and downwards, that's always a tricky one as a leader, especially if there's board members to manage as well as your own team. And thinking about that in terms of all the way down in your structure, whether it's hierarchy or more of a flat structure, everybody wants to have a positive relationship within that structure, and how we facilitate that will ultimately drive behaviors of your culture. Ways of working, someone talked about flexibility, but again, collaboration, communication styles, that all comes into the mix when we think about the ways in which we work. And then the level of support that we give to people also drives the culture in which we can create and embed a psychologically safe working environment. Just check if there's no other ones in the chat. Okay, so not being afraid to fail is kind of the strap line of all of this, which you've definitely kind of been saying in the chat. So that safety comes from being yourself and learning as you go. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You're not going to be able to just say this and people just feel that they can have that creativity and that ability to just explore without failure. Is something that we're going to have to try to embed over time and try to seek out those desirable behaviors along the way. It's not sort of a quick fix, unfortunately. So let's jump into how do we create these safe environments? So we've looked at what it is and what the benefits are. So how do we do that within your business? So first, some science. I always like to kind of go back to the science aspect of things. So our brains look for threats. So we actually scan for threats every 5 seconds. And what happens is when we see a threat, or we feel stressed, or we feel under pressure, or we're feeling a little bit vulnerable, the front cortex of our brain actually either partially or wholly shuts down. And when your brain completes that shutdown because of the threat that is identified, your brain then lacks the ability to show creativity, innovation, problem solving, and even just pragmatic decision making. So in turn, obviously, when you think about how our brains used to work, way back when, obviously you're looking at different threats, but when we think about threats in the workplace, it is that feeling of stress, overload, burnt out, mental capacity, pressure, deadlines. So when people are feeling those threats, the stress comes in and then it immediately shuts down the ability for us to actually perform in a high way. So how do we get that balance? Ensuring that safety increases performance is absolutely key in understanding the science. So making people perform under such a high level of pressure or a high level of threat and risk actually prohibits their performance to be above average, and actually impacts their decision making, which is a huge part in why we're talking about this today. It really is like a fight or flight or freeze response that we have. And as we feel unsafe, we do shut down. And then in turn, like we said, we stop sharing, we stop thinking logically about decisions, we stop performing, we stop responding to people as we normally would. So communication closes down. So it's not just a case of, okay, let's look at where we can excel. Actually, this whole idea and this concept actually is underpinned by actually performance and allowing your people to excel in the best way possible and actually just doing the fundamentals of their job even better. So if you're looking at your performance and your KPIs and your objectives as part of your appraisal process, this should be something that we should be looking to introduce and to actively seek out where we've got those threat points and how we manage them. So warning signs. So how do we identify somebody's in that fight, flight, or freeze mode? So warning signs when someone doesn't feel as though they have that safety in the environment. So not sharing thoughts. So, if you're holding discussions, town hall meetings, project teams, and someone's coming but actively not showing up for themselves, actively not sharing ideas, that's probably a warning sign. Difficult topics are avoided. So maybe this is peer-to-peer between leaders. If difficult topics are avoided and they don't want to be discussed, is that because there could be challenging conflict? Is that because there's risk that there could be failure? It may be a topic that and a conversation on how that goes. So that's also another trend that we quite often see when psychological safety isn't present. Always agreeing with leaders. So if you've got somebody that's happy to kind of go with the flow, they seem very compliant, and you almost would think that they're a perfect employee to manage, but actually sometimes is there room for disagreement and that positive conflict? Do you want to be challenged as a leader, and if so, why do they not feel as though they've got the empowerment to do so? So if someone's already agreeing and always kind of just following the commands, that's a warning sign. Not asking for help, so drowning, struggling with something, dealing with a difficult task, falling behind on deadlines, volunteering for maybe projects or tasks that they feel are outside of their comfort zone but don't feel confident enough to say why. Again, trying to identify people when they're in that mode of identifying a threat is key. And a business that has very few disagreements is actually a warning sign as a trend. Every business has its different cultural values and how the makeup is and that DNA of the business. And the politics should be there, and they're healthy if we can have positive conflict. But if a business is always very conflict-free and everybody is just kind of disagreeing and avoiding those topics of maybe conflict or controversy, then again, that is a warning sign. So these are trends. These are not kind of a tick box, but it's about thinking about what do we hear, see, and observe as managers. So just don't think about how people talk, but just observe their behavior, their trends in terms of their performance as well. So we look at how do we create this? So first of all, just look at where you are. So maybe go back to those warning signs we just spoke about and identify, do you think you've got anybody on your team at the moment that's flagging up as a warning? Do you think you've got people on there that are struggling and don't feel safe? Then let's look at your culture. Everyone probably will have their own culture statements. They would have maybe realigned their values, and they've got their mission statement and their focus. So there's been a huge amount of work gone into, where the business needs to go and actually having that business strategy in the background, and culture has been a huge piece of that. But what is your culture, and is that underpinned by some of those values and behaviors that we've talked about today? So have a clearly defined culture and make sure that that's aligned with this sort of desire to become psychologically safe. Ask for feedback on the culture. Is that still accurate? Is that just a desired culture and not actually the reality? How do you get that feedback loop going? How do you encourage thoughts and progression in that? And understand your employees' strengths. So everybody is made up completely differently, as we've kind of realized on this journey, but actually understanding what their strengths are. Do you really know this? So in your team, do you really know what somebody strives at and excels, and where they could be used best, and actually how they could then add into different teams or collaborations, and just understanding the dynamics within your team is a great way to start on creating that safety. Okay, leadership is something that also comes into play, and this will all kind of fit very nicely with the audience of the webinar. So what is your leadership culture? Some of those people that we had in the chat around kind of being blamed, having that fear, risk of humiliation and failure, that comes from your leadership culture. And that very much is led from top down. So you need to clearly define within your overall culture what your leadership culture is. How do you want people to behave? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they know? Is there a meeting? How do they know that decisions are made? How does everyone have an equal say and equal opportunity to be equitable in that leadership team? And what leadership development needs are there? So you may be putting in development plans, succession plans for your team, and you may have a good training and development budget, say for your team, but have you allocated any of that for leadership development? Because that is something that is a sort of CPT and needs to be continued throughout. So it's not sort of once you've become a leader or you feel as though you're in line with the leadership culture that your job is done. It's something that you need to kind of continue to develop on. So as a business, what can you do to keep improving on that? One thing to take away from all of this is, I would say, if you're kind of really interested in this and as a starting point, it would be this slide. So not affiliated with this book and the process that they do, but I have tried and tested it with a couple of businesses, and I think the results are fantastic. So the Phyllis Organisation is a book slash process that you can go through. They ask you 7 questions, and that helps you to identify how psychologically safe your team is. You can run this in micro scale, so you can do it quite granularly. On individual scales, you can run it across your whole organization. The test is completely free. And they run it off of global data. So you've got a benchmark against sectors, different countries. So again, if you've got maybe different sites overseas, you can kind of see if there's trends. So one thing that I would say to take away from this is, if you actually just want a starting point and statistics of how you look, it's a very simple process to run across your team, and it's simply just asking people to answer 7 questions. You gain the results, and from there you can kind of map out where you want to go. So another one for the chat. So the best team. So let's think about when you've been part of the best team that you've been performing. And I just want you to put in there, how did you feel to be part of that team and what made it feel good? So we've all got some examples of maybe where we've worked with a really good manager or leadership team, or we've been on a project, but what was it actually about that team that felt so good for you to have a good working relationship and performance? Try to be quite specific. So included, listened to, and valued. Yeah, excellent. It's really important that we look at the word feeling, because this is all very emotive. So it's all very very bespoke to you and how you feel. But we need to think about creating that feeling across your teams. Continue to put in the chat, please. Really interested to see everybody's thoughts on when they've been in a safe team. And that feeling that they've had, the feeling that it brings is what we're striving to achieve. The feeling of being needed, yeah, that's really interesting. So actually feeling as though you can add value, I think. Again, I think many of us have probably been on meetings where it's just a numbers game, or maybe they've had to have a certain number from each team or division, or to just make it equitable, which is great, but actually feeling as though you've been selected because you've been needed to add value is really great. Inclusive, everybody's opinions matter. Yeah. Having mutual respect for each other. Again, really interesting on that one. How do we, I guess, how do we incorporate that when we've got a team where you've got the hierarchy involved? So I would imagine that if you're on a team where maybe you've got someone from the C-suite or the board on there, would that maybe dramatically change how you feel instantly? I'm just going to put an improv question in. If one of your team or yourself had to be involved in, say, an ad hoc project or a feedback team, and the CEO was on there, or even, you know, someone maybe such as a non-exec that had more seniority, do you feel as though that would impact how you'd feel? And does that impact maybe that feeling of mutual respect? Yes, it's interesting. So the hierarchy really plays a big part in this, but it needs to be led from top down. Let's just come off that one. Thank you, guys. Keep continuing to add in the chat if you're thinking about this. Okay, so what drives culture? So positive relationships, I think we've talked about that, but gaining that positivity between up and down workings, the way in which we work. So, you know, that has developed and, you know, probably excelled the way in which we work from COVID, but much more flexibility, much more emphasis on work-life balance and job satisfaction. So the way in which we work drives your culture. The support that we get, you know, and that can be internally, externally. Sessions like today, if it's sponsored by leaders, or you can deliver that to your team. And the feeling of having clarity across the whole business is key. When it's not transparent what you're trying to achieve and what your values are, or what your leadership team are trying to achieve, if you don't have that clarity, then the culture becomes muddied, unfortunately. So there's a nice little diagram on the side, and you can see on here some of the words that have been selected in bold are the ones that really kind of pull out, but there's a whole load of other things such as your recruitment process, your budgeting, team well-being, you know, your mental health awareness, communication styles, and motivating people. So all this sort of stuff drives into your culture. So to be honest, we all can make mistakes. We've all been in meetings where maybe someone said something and on reflection you think, I didn't respond to that very well, or I didn't actually allow them to have the space to just discuss that, or I didn't facilitate that very well. So it's okay to say that we've all made mistakes, particularly in our leadership style. But can we try to do a few of these behaviors? Can we model curiosity? So can we provoke people to think outside the box? If they come with you with a problem, you know, well, what's the solution? How can we do that better? How can we do that quicker? How can we do that without using all the budget? Can we do that without pulling in this other team? Could we ask this other team? So model that curiosity throughout allows people to start feeling as though it's not so transactional. Ask lots of questions all the time, you know, and I think as part of a leader, it's having that ability to be really authentic and a little bit vulnerable. So if you need to, you know, letting your guard down and you know, quite telling if someone feels differently, if a member of the C-suite or boards on a meeting, you know, how do we encourage that that level of the team to open up and let their guard down a little, because that's the only way we're going to start seeing this transition of psychological safety. Demonstrate active listening. I mean, we've talked about this when we talked about inclusivity, challenging conversations, even unconscious bias decisions. You know, this has been throughout, but demonstrate real active listening is key. And challenge each other safely. I've mentioned this word quite a lot throughout the session, but having that positive challenge and conflict. So how do you as a leader and a manager facilitate that? How do you allow people to feel that there's that safety to do so without it escalating into maybe a disagreement or conflict that then creates more problems? So let's, you know, think about how we do that. Margins versus dominant groups. So again, you will in your workforce have a very unique dynamic, and you may have dominant groups of people and you'll have your margin groups of people. So again, thinking about how do they like to work? How do they like to give feedback, speak up? Are they in environments where they actually feel more comfortable? Can you facilitate equitable platforms where people feel as though they can be safe to share ideas? I'm just going to look in the chat to see. Trust is important. Your team must be able to trust you 100%. So again, that kind of that vulnerability, that if you've made a mistake, or you've suggested an idea and maybe it has failed or it's not been right, and you've learned from that, you know, explaining that and showing that to the team is very key in showing that they can trust you on your behavior and you can lead by example. So ideas to put into place. So we're now into the practical element. I'm just going to take a time check. We're absolutely fine. So psychologically safe teams will present all of these aspects. They'll see mistakes as opportunities to learn. And I just mentioned that. So you as a leader, if you've made a mistake, you need to instill that within your team, that actually this is an opportunity to learn and develop, not to be punished or kind of moved off of a project team. I've seen that many times where someone's maybe suggests something hasn't gone to plan and then they've been instantly moved off a project team, or there's been a conversation over, is this job right for you, etc. Trying to remove that is absolutely key. Psychologically safe teams will also take risks and sometimes fail, and it's okay to fail. So having some good examples, even maybe from some of your board level of their career history, and explaining where they've taken risks and it's been a learning opportunity is key. Speaking their minds freely. So again, think about, do you have a HR system where you're able to encourage people to share their ideas anonymously through there? Or, you know, how often do you speak to your team as managers in an informal or formal way where they can speak up? How often do you meet as a group? So think about aspects of speaking and being free to speak. Share their struggles and barriers openly. So again, if you struggle with something, psychological teams will just share that and say, this has happened and this is a pitfall and I'm really struggling with this. And they'll be very collaborative in trying to open it up to the floor, rather than you know, ring fencing it and thinking, oh, this is a weakness, or you know, people are going to think I'm failing. So it's that ability to share the struggles. So how do we encourage that? And trust your team. Obviously, someone just said that in the chat, but having that mutual trust is absolutely key. So psychological safe teams will have this. Think about some of these examples and see if you kind of tick any of these boxes. And I'm sure there will be areas in which you can explore. So action points to take away from today. So challenge status quo. I think I've talked about this throughout, but why do we do things this way? You know, can you hold regular meetings, or can you have regular catch-ups across companies, across teams, and challenge each other on, why do we do it this way? What works and what doesn't? Can we do things better? What feedback do you get from this? And then also, what do you do with that feedback? So once you've got people actually giving you that feedback loop, valuable or invaluable, how you respond and how you behave on that is very, very much more important as well. So thinking about your behaviors as an outcome is key. So what do you do once you get that feedback, and how can you change things? So I think when you get positive feedback and you get people to challenge, it's about celebrating the success or the risks that people have taken. So think about your communications. Do you have newsletters? Do you have a system where you can share kudos? Do you have cultural awards? So think of all these opportunities where actually, if you can get people to start challenging the way you do things, and then becomes a positive behavior, almost you need to reward those challenges rather than the outcome, because it's the behaviors that we're trying to instill. Take time to explore. So hack days or other exploring opportunities. So how often do you get together as a team and be able to just completely have creativity? Now, I know people are busy doing their day jobs and this is maybe high in the sky, but even if it's just an hour, you know, allowing people to step away from their emails and their teams, and just having some time to explore, you know, learning about different methods, trying new ways of doing things, looking at behaviors, you know, actually we tried this the other day, or this team have introduced a new process, and just explore the pros and cons of those. So just allowing yourself actually time as a leader to deliver that. Look at how you handle disagreements is absolutely key. So a kind of a little bit of psychometric assessments on yourself is absolutely key when looking at action points. So how do you handle disagreements, and how do people feel they can disagree? You know, And this will all be learned behavior, and this will be driven from the culture. What if people cannot agree? What do you give, what do you do in those situations where there's a conflict and there's actually the resolution can't be found? How do you handle that as a leader? And is there space for these sorts of conversations? Need to think back about all the previous sort of behaviors that they've seen, and it's about trying to change the way in which you do manage these conversations. Reflect on what type of leader you are. So there's the very traditional command and control, which some of us may have been on the end of, unfortunately, but that is a type of leader. I don't normally think that this sort of allows the psychological safety environment to thrive, but that is a type. There's a collaborative, so you're very much in the mix of the ideas. You can be a mentor, so you're more of a guider. You add guidance, you add support. You can be an organizer. So a type of leader is just someone that organizes things and allows and facilitates change or development, but you're almost just facilitating that environment. And then you've got a leader that can be more like a friend, and you can be multiple of these, and obviously in different scenarios. But it's interesting. Again, take a second if you can just to pop in the chat to think, what sort of leader do you think you are most of the time? So when there's not conflict or when there's not a particular challenge that's going on, just have a look at that list, and I'll just be interested to see which one stands out for you. Friend, someone's put. Anybody else willing to share what they feel that their type of leadership is? Organizer and friend. Yeah, organizer. So it's that like facilitating that journey, isn't it? Yeah, which is very much, I guess, like collaborative as well. So organizer seems to be top of the list. Interesting. Thank you. So leadership is different to management, and I think it's just very key that we just highlight this. So it's not about it's about wanting to make a difference and engaging and leading people to make change. So it's that journey, like I just said. Anyone in the organization can be a leader. So it's not about job title. And it's not particularly even about if you've got direct accountability for a team. You as a leader can have no direct leads, but you have management, but you can lead the whole organization in those behaviors just by how you behave yourself and how you communicate, and how you react on what you see, hear and feel. Mentor, friend, try to be collaborative. Yeah, excellent. And then finally, collaborate with your team. So I think we talked about that Phyllis Organisation. So how psychologically safe is your workplace? I think that's an excellent starting point to take away from today. How can you tell, where do you want to be in terms of your values, and where are you at the moment? And let's look at where we can get to in terms of collaboration. What helps you feel safe? We talked about some of that, and then making sure that you actually try to instill that within your own team. So what you are seeking, you also need to deliver. And what can you do to nurture that? So it's all about your behavior and the desired values that you wish to see from your team. So where will you start? We've obviously covered off quite a lot of content, but just as a starting point, so look at your culture, ask your people what they think. You may have a cultural value of fairness. Okay, ask your people, how fair do you think we are as leaders? How fair do you think a particular team is? How fair do you think the C-suite is? It can be quite vulnerable to open up to certain teams, but I think to show that level of transparency and vulnerability is the only way in which you will actually be able to see a definite change and definite positive growth. So it's about kind of accepting that you have to analyze the data that you've got before you can move forward. Hold honest discussions with leaders. So how do we facilitate that? So when we do bring someone in from the senior leadership team, how can people feel that they can be honest and be present in those and not just have to disagree? And finally, address issues. So don't avoid those difficult conversations. Really feel as though you allow the space to have those issues and issues be addressed. Okay, so hopefully by now you should be able to summarize what psychological safety is and how that impacts you as a leader and your team, and how you'd be able to influence that to drive the cultural change, you should be able to explain to your peers and leadership why this should be a conversation at board level. I think I've kind of really emphasized that, but I'm very passionate that this is a huge piece in terms of performance. And then we've gone over some of the tools, ideas, resources, learning, and extra reading material that you could do in turn to help move your team or your company onto development and growth. I am perfectly on time, which is good to know. So I've got any time for questions now. Oh, no problem, Suzanne. Thank you for leaving your comment. Please feel free to add any questions into the chat now. We've got sort of 5 minutes or so. I'll click onto the other slides while people may be adding any questions or comments that they want me to go through. We've got 2 further live webinars as part of the series. So this is 4, so we've got 5 and 6. So webinar 5 will be on Thursday, the 16th of November. And that's on inclusive communication. And then the final one is on January the 23rd, and that is the final one of the series, and the topic is yet to be decided. So again, really, I think we mentioned there about the feedback form and the survey. Again, if there's any aspects of this that you'd want to dive deeper into, again, we really take that on board and try to mold the agendas to what people like to talk about. So please feel free to be open. But these are a couple of the other topics that we've covered today. These are kind of what IHRS and Searchlight are doing for MGAA in terms of delivering bespoke workshops and board training. So it's just a couple of other options you may want to explore. And obviously my details are on the final screen, which I'll leave up. But I think I've got one. How can I educate my leaders? Yeah, so I think unfortunately this comes down to CPD, and you know, obviously some things can be quite restrictive in terms of budgeting. So it's a really good question. I think what you need to do is, in my opinion, is start with psychometric assessments with your leadership team. You'll be able to then look at their strengths and their weaknesses, how they react under pressure, how do they like to communicate. So you need to understand them before you then can start to educate on the differences. So there are some free psychological assessments out there that you can do online, maybe particularly just starting with that Phyllis Organisation with those 7 questions just for your leaders, just to understand where you are. I think you need to get the starting point and establish the end goal, what you're trying to desire, you know, your desired outcome. And then it needs to be a combination of learning. So it could be that they could have coaching and mentoring from just from a business coach. Maybe someone completely outside the sector that can add that innovation and creativity. You could have a buddying system internally. So I ran a talent leadership program for my previous company, and we ran a mentoring and buddying program over a 12-month period where we had rising stars that were going into leadership, and they would be buddied up with someone who's already in a leadership position that are showing qualities very similar. Again, we did psychometric assessment, so we understood that the connection was correct, and that they had similar attributes and strengths. And we tried to kind of mentor them, I guess. But yeah, I think there has to be some sort of educational piece there for them, but also it's the soft skills that make the leadership ability to change, and just in terms of your C-suite, what the expectations are and how they behave, because unfortunately, unless your C-suite is completely aligned with how you want your leadership culture to be, there'll always be a difference. But yeah, hopefully a couple of ideas there for you to take on board. But I would definitely start with just the assessment to start with, and you would do a skill gap analysis of what you want to do. No problem. Any other questions for now? Got a couple of more minutes, so please feel free. Thank you, Andrew. Tim, I'm happy for you to sort of round up with me if you can, while we still get any more comments in. But thank you very much for everybody's times today over sort of a lunch break. I really appreciate, and lots of engagement on the chat and on the poll. So hopefully it's been really informative, and please do feel free to reach out if you've got any further questions or any other support I can add.
Thank you, Holly. No other questions are coming in, just lots of thank yous, which of course are really appreciated. So it just remains for me to say thank you once again to Holly and Insurance HR Solutions and Searchlight for delivering our training today. Do look out for session 5, which, as Holly mentioned, will be held on Thursday, the 16th of November. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Please don't forget to provide your feedback and do look out for forthcoming MGAA events. Hope you all have a good afternoon. Thanks again for joining us and see you all soon.